The land stretched endlessly beneath the wide sky, a mixture of red earth, whispering grasses, and the faint scent of sage carried by the wind. Jacob Turner, a lone rancher hardened by years of toil, rose with the dawn every day, his boots carrying him across the fields of cattle, his hands roughened by rope and leather. He was a man of few words, one who lived with silence as his closest companion, for the ranch had been his only inheritance. After his family was lost to sickness years ago, Jacob had learned not to expect much from life, for the land was harsh and people even harsher. But sometimes fate has a way of placing blessings in the paths of those who have nearly forgotten what it means to feel alive. One evening, as the sun melted into streaks of crimson across the horizon, Jacob came across a figure by the river, her presence so quiet that she might have been part of the land itself. She was an Apache woman, her long dark hair flowing like a curtain of night, her eyes holding both strength and sorrow. She was wounded, her legs scraped, her hands trembling as though she had traveled far. Without hesitation, Jacob dismounted his horse and offered her water, his voice steady though his heart raced with caution. The Apache were proud, and tensions between her people and settlers were always on the edge of fire. But something in her gaze disarmed him, something that whispered she was not an enemy, but a soul caught in the cruel nets of life. She spoke her name softly, Ayanna. It meant eternal blossom, though Jacob did not know it then. She told him little, only that she was far from her people, searching for peace in a world that had given her none. Jacob brought her back to his cabin, not out of obligation, but out of instinct he couldn't explain. He tended her wounds, offered her bread and warmth, and for the first time in years, the silence of his home was filled with more than the creak of wood and the howl of wind. He found himself stealing glances at her as she rested, wondering why fate had led her to him. Days turned into weeks, and Ayanna's strength returned, yet she did not leave. She helped him with the ranch, her movements graceful yet purposeful, her spirit unafraid of hard work. The townsfolk whispered when they saw her with Jacob, for an Apache woman and a rancher living side by side was a scandal in their eyes. But Jacob didn't care for whispers, and Ayanna seemed untouched by judgment. He began to learn her language in fragments, and in return, she began to learn his. And slowly, in the quiet moments when they shared bread by the fire, when their hands brushed as they carried water, when laughter escaped her lips, like music, he had forgotten. Jacob realized something terrifying and beautiful. He could not forget her. He could not imagine his home without her shadow against the firelight. But deep inside, he feared the world would not allow what had quietly grown between them. Still, every morning when he opened his eyes and saw her moving gracefully across the cabin, he felt as though life had given him a blessing he never deserved, a secret gift hidden in the heart of the wilderness. And though neither of them had spoken the words aloud, the truth lingered in the air, between them like a promise waiting for courage to give it voice. Jacob's heart warred against his mind each passing day. The land was cruel, the town was crueler, and he knew whispers could turn to fire if people felt scandalized enough. Yet every moment with Ayanna drew him deeper into something he could no longer deny. She was more than a guest, more than a woman who had stumbled into his life wounded and weary. She had become the pulse of his days, the quiet comfort in his nights, the reason his cabin no longer felt like a grave of memories, but like a home. But he also knew she carried scars not only on her skin but in her spirit. One evening, as storm clouds rolled heavy across the sky, Ayanna sat by the fire and spoke of her past. Her voice was low, the flames painting her face in gold and shadow. She told him of how she had once been promised to another within her tribe, a union that would have bound her to a life without choice, a life where her heart had no place. She had fled, risking exile, risking everything, in search of freedom. Her words carried no self-pity, only strength. Yet Jacob felt his chest tighten with the weight of her story. He reached for her hand then, calloused fingers brushing against hers, and said in the same quiet voice he always carried, "You don't have to run anymore." Her dark eyes lifted to his, and in that look, Jacob knew he had spoken more than comfort. He had spoken the truth of his heart, the promise he had been too afraid to voice. The storm raged outside, rain beating against the wooden cabin, but inside, the world grew still as she leaned closer, her forehead resting against his. For Jacob, it was as though the years of loneliness had finally broken. replaced by a bond stronger than the whispers of any town or the prejudice of any land. From that night, things shifted. They worked side by side not as two lives crossing, but as two lives joined. The cattle seemed less restless, the land less harsh, the nights less empty. Jacob no longer feared the morning, for when he opened his eyes, he saw her presence a secret blessing. He had never prayed for yet had been given nonetheless. Still, challenges loomed. Men in town warned him that taking an Apache woman as wife would bring trouble, that no good could come from it. But Jacob, for the first time in his life, found courage in his heart greater than his fear. He stood tall, looked those men in the eyes, and said, "She is mine, and I am hers. I won't forget her, not now, not ever." And with Ayanna's hand in his, he felt unbreakable. Their union was not written on paper nor blessed by the town, but it was etched into the soil they worked, into the fire they shared, into the love that no law or prejudice could erase. And dear listener, as Jacob's story reminds us, sometimes the blessings we least expect are the ones we can never forget. Sometimes love crosses the boundaries the world tries to draw, and in its courage, we find redemption. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that even the loneliest souls can be given a secret blessing, then I invite you subscribe to this channel. More stories like this await you, stories of courage, love, and the kind of hope that can light even the darkest nights.